Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Tuesday Climate Action Fortnight. So that video that you've just seen at the beginning is one of our Love Where You Live campaign videos, which is all about anti-littering, anti-fly tipping and being aware of plastic pollution. And if you want to find out more about those, you can go on our website and find out all about those videos that were produced by some of our students in Leicester. So the video you've just seen was by children at King Richard the Infant School. So that's all available as a resource for people to have a look at. So today is day 7. Can't believe day 7 already. So for those that don't know who I am, my name's Lee Jowett. I'm the Sustainable Schools Coordinator here at the Council. And in the background today producing is Amy Peace, who is a Project Officer. So today's day is all about school grounds. And I'm very pleased to say we've got 3 speakers that are joining us today. So Sam Woods from the Conservation Volunteers, Martha Rose from Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust, and Mary Jackson from Learning Through Landscapes. So in a minute we'll go across to those wonderful presenters that will be telling us all about how we can use our school grounds and how it fits in with our climate emergency. We've got 2 activities today, which is all about designing your own ideal playground and also easy mini-beast habitats that you can do in school or at home. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to our first speaker today. So our first speaker today is Sam Woods. Sam works for the Conservation Volunteers, or TCV, as you might know her from. And Sam's going to be telling us all about how we can use our school grounds. So Sam, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm just going to put my PowerPoint up, if I can. Oh, okay, can you see my PowerPoint?
We can, yeah.
Great, that's lovely. I'm just going to move it onto my screen as well. So good morning, everybody. So I'm going to talk about food growing in schools and how that can help us in our work with climate change. So let me just pop that onto there and there. Okay, so why would we want to grow food in schools in order to fight climate change is the question. So one thing we all know probably by this stage of day 7 is that plants absorb this thing called carbon dioxide, which is one of the causes of climate change. And we also know that our food plants can provide habitat and food for pollinators. Now I know Martha Rose is going to talk a bit more about how we can help insects, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Now, food plants can take all types of shapes and sizes, and so food actually does grow on trees. And as well as providing us with lovely food, trees also provide some shading and cooling. But the trees also do another really clever thing when they're in leaf, which is that when the leaves are spreading out and the rain falls on the leaves, the leaves slow the rain down so that when it hits the ground, it can actually soak into the ground rather than bouncing off. And that helps to reduce flooding, which is one of the negative impacts of climate change. And then when the rain sort of trickles onto the ground, the roots of the trees and the other plants help the water to spread across in the soil and down in the soil. So again, it reduces flooding. So having any kind of plant cover in our gardens, in our school grounds, is really useful for climate change. But it's particularly useful in schools because we're kind of building the big space in schools. If we have space, the soil will also help to hold the carbon, but we also then get our lovely food plants at the end of it as well. So all good stuff. So what can you grow in school? It depends on how much space you've got. I know some schools in Leicester have a lot of grounds and some have very little or mostly concrete. But we can grow anything from great big tall apple trees, plum trees, those kind of things, to bushes with fruits on like red currants, black currants, raspberries, down to our smaller plants. So we could have cover of strawberries, or we could have lots of green leafy plants all the way down under the soil into the root level. And we can also grow flowers. Some flowers are also edible, so we can have flowers that go in our salads, or we can have some flowers that aren't edible for us but are really good for the insects and the bees. And we can also grow lots of lovely herbs like coriander and dill and parsley that are going to flavour up our food. So we can grow all kinds of things. Even if we have very limited space, we can grow something that we can eat. So how do we make our gardening climate friendly? So there is this thing called mulch. Mulch basically means anything that you use to cover over the top of the soil. So it could be wood chips, it could even be gravel, but it's better if it's something like compost or a kind of a wood chip, something that's natural. And what that will help to do is it will suppress weeds, but it will also help to keep the water in the soil. We can also collect water, so if we have rain barrels or rain gardens, we can collect water so that the soil isn't drying out as it becomes hotter. And we can grow more things that grow at different levels. So if we have plants like fruit bushes and trees, their roots will grow at different levels and help to spread water out in the soil. If we don't dig our soil, then we won't be disturbing all the little microbes and nematodes and things, and they will then stay in the soil and hold carbon in there. And another thing we can also do is to make our own compost. So if we have fruit at break time, instead of putting that in the rubbish bin, if we put it into a compost bin, then that will turn back into soil, and all of that carbon will also be locked up. And everything that we do that protects the soil, looks after the worms, looks after the microbes, is going to help lock up carbon in the soil. So one thing to think about is keeping the ground covered. So I've talked about mulching, but the other way of keeping the ground covered is to have lots and lots of different plants. And it also looks really pretty if you have lots and lots of plants growing in your garden. This is my back garden in September. And you can see that I've made sure that the soil isn't bare, and that also helps to keep the water in and also encourage lots of soil to the soil ecosystem. If you've got sorry, I jumped a slide there. If you've got a small space with poor or no soil, you can grow in containers. And I grew lots of things in containers during lockdown. And if you've only got small spaces in school, you can even grow apple trees and plum trees. If you buy the right varieties, you can even grow those in containers. But do put a layer of mulch on the top so that they stay and keep them well watered, because things in pots will dry out more quickly. But you can actually grow a lot of different kind of foods in containers, even if you've only got a concrete playground. But do think about plants growing. So just like you're all growing, your plants are going to start off as tiny, tiny seeds, but they will grow and they do need space, just like people. Plants need space. So this is kale and broccoli when they were first planted out in May this year, and by September they've grown to being quite monster plants, and they're even bigger than that now. So, and they do stay in the soil for quite a long time. So when you're planning your school gardens, remember to think about what things are going to grow and how long they're going to stay in the ground before you harvest them, because you have to be very patient when you're a gardener. So we've just come through the sort of pumpkin season. So these were my squash plants way back in June, and then just before harvesting they'd grown like this. And the pumpkins and squashes are nice because you can grow them up. So even if you have a fairly small space, you can grow things up as well as across. So think about in your school gardens growing things upwards as well as over the ground. So some things that you can still be doing now. It's getting quite late in the growing season. We're coming up to the time when really it's winter and everything just wants to rest until the spring. But you could still plant some broad beans, or you probably won't get lettuce to germinate now, but garlic and onions as well. Because it's stayed quite warm, we might still be able to plant a few things outdoors. So, and even if you can't plant outdoors, there are things that you can grow indoors all year round. So all of your herbs you can grow on windowsills all year round. Your lovely basil that you can put on pasta or on pizzas, and coriander that you can put in your curries. You can still be growing those on your windowsills from seed. Now, just remember that when you're growing things, we want to think about the whole environment. So if you're going to use plastic pots and things to grow your seeds in, just make sure that they're reused ones. Don't buy new plastic ones, or upcycle things that you have around the house. So take things out of your recycling bins to make plant trays, or grow in cardboard, even old toilet rolls. You can use as little plant pots that will then degrade in the soil, and then you won't be adding to the plastic pollution. And when you're choosing the compost that you're going to grow your seeds in, it's really much more environmentally friendly to not use peat. So look for peat-free compost. And this is one for the teachers. If you are trying to make new school gardens, try and buy your compost in bulk, because it will be A, much cheaper, and B, you'll be able to cover a larger area with your peat-free compost. And I can advise people if they're wanting to buy compost. So everything that you grow in school can link into different parts of the curriculum. So if you're growing apple trees, you can link that to your history curriculum. Apples were actually brought to Britain by the Romans. So there's lots and lots of ways of linking through the whole school year, and linking that into different parts of the curriculum. And I can advise people more about that if they want to follow that through. We can end up with a massive feast for free. So this can obviously lead into, this is a kind of fruit harvest, can lead into your cooking clubs and using your own, the produce from your gardens in your own cooking clubs. And everything that you grow, even if it's not feeding you, will feed something. So the thing on the right is the rowan berries, which are for the birds rather than for us. And yeah, don't forget to feed the bees as well. So this is a borage plant. So this is good. I know Martha Rose is going to talk more about insects, but these will help to attract beneficial insects, which will help your food plants as well as the insects themselves. Okay, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but just for the teachers out there, there's a whole range of different help and support that I can give you. If you want me to come and visit your school or give you advice over the phone, I can also do that. And I'll just tell you about, there's different kinds of help that's available at the moment. So any schools that are wanting to plant trees, fruit trees, there are free orchard packs available. Contact me for more details. I also have a range of seeds available that people, probably next spring now, but if you contact me, I can help you with seeds. And we have two exciting competitions in Leicester. We have the Grow Your Own Grub competition, the Meal in a Barrow, and the pumpkin garden competition. So there'll be information coming out about those in due course. And if you want to keep in touch with us, we have a lovely Leicester Food Growing Facebook page that has lots of hints and tips on it, and we also have a YouTube channel. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Wow, amazing. Wow, thank you, Sam. So many things. And I'm really pleased that there's lots of things on that list that I'm doing in my sort of garden here at home. So that's absolutely fantastic. The one that I've spotted, and I have to say I'm slightly jealous, Amy built a wormery at the weekend, and I suddenly thought, I'm not sure I can build one, but I've suddenly gone on looking around online to see kind of, could I make one, or if not, could I buy one? Because I think that's the only bit missing in my garden at the moment. So that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much.
I've got quite a nice set of instructions for making one out of old tyres, Lee. If you're interested in how to make a tyre wormery, I can teach you how to make a tyre wormery. Yeah,
no, that sounds good. Yeah, definitely send me that. I'll have a look. Now, unfortunately, I'm very tempted to buy a new one, which is probably not the whole point of a lot of these things. So yeah, any tips on how to build one would be great, definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We'll hand over to our next speaker next, and this is Martha Rose from the Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust. Martha's going to be talking about particular insects in our school grounds. So I'll hand over to Martha then, if that's okay. I think you just need to unmute yourself, Martha, sorry.
Right, can you hear me now? Sorry, thank you for mine. Excellent. Right, well, hello everyone, I'm Martha and I work for Leicestershire and Rutland Wildlife Trust. Let's do the next slide. and I'm here to talk to you today about taking action for insects. So as you probably know, insects are an invertebrate, and we can tell them apart from other mini beasts because they have 6 legs, wings, and their bodies are in 3 parts or segments: head, thorax and abdomen. But all that I'm going to talk to you about today helps all kinds of different wildlife. So a bit about the Wildlife Trust. So we're all about looking after wildlife and wild spaces in Leicestershire and Rutland. So we're a local conservation charity, and for over 60 years we've been saving wildlife and engaging people in nature. So I'm one of the education officers, so I work with children. I do a lot of forest school sessions, and here's my colleague. Some of you might even know her. Here's Sarah, delivering a forest school session. We have 35 nature reserves that we look after. They're wild places across the 2 counties. They're special places for all kinds of wild plants and animals to live. And we also look after particular types of species like this osprey here. So we've done some introduction programs, introducing wildlife back into the county. But unfortunately, despite our best efforts with looking after our wildlife in our nature reserves and in lots of different places across the city, our wildlife is in trouble. So insects, for example, are dying out up to 8 times faster than other animals, and lots of animals and wildlife across the UK face extinction. And there are different reasons for this. So there are various threats. So habitat loss and habitat fragmentation. So that's when homes where the wildlife live, like forests or woods, are either destroyed or broken up into smaller pieces. And this can be due to road building or building houses or other areas for us to use. Another threat is in agriculture, that's growing food, and particularly something called intensification. And that's when farms are very large and areas like the hedgerows where wild animals can live and wild bits around the fields are removed. And also lots of chemicals are used, like pesticides, which isn't good for insects. And lastly, pollution, and that could be found in kind of fresh water, so in rivers and ponds, that hurt the aquatics, the animals that live in water. But of course, another big threat, which is why we're here today, is climate change. And unfortunately, many species might not be able to adapt quickly enough to change to the changes that we're seeing. And that might result in quite a few large-scale extinctions, so animals or species dying out altogether. And one insect group, moths, are particularly being affected by climate change at the moment. So in the last 50 years, we've seen a 48% decline in moths, and that is due to climate change. So I'm calling you today to take action for insects, and the key message is it's not too late to help insects and in turn other wildlife. And there are lots of things you can do at home and in your school grounds to help insects. And why are they important? Well, as you probably know, they're very good pollinators, which we'll come on to. But other things that you might not know they do for us are that they control pests. So Sam was talking about growing food, and you might know about all the different aphids and slugs and things that might eat your plants. Well, we've got insects that will help reduce the pests that eat your food. So wasps, for example, and ladybirds are very good at eating aphids that will be drinking the sap from your food plants. Another thing they do is good at nutrient recycling. So that's turning nutrients back into the soils, having really good soils that are fertile and good for growing food and crops. They're also good at decomposition, which means breaking down leaves and other dead plant material and animals into smaller pieces, which then can be turned into soil. And they're also food for other species, which we'll come on to in a minute. So as it says here, 3/4 of crops grown by humans require pollination by insects. That's moving pollen from one plant to another, so it can provide fruit or seeds. So here we are, if we didn't have pollinators, we wouldn't have all this fruit, all these vegetables and many other foods as well, which are plant-based, made from fruit or vegetables. And also, it's not just food that they provide for us through pollination. There are also lots of other things that depend on our pollinators. And when I'm talking about pollinators, we've got a picture of a bee there, but other pollinators are butterflies, moths, also wasps as well, hoverflies. So lots of different pollinators in the insect group that are really important in making medicines for us, different fibres, so our clothing, and fuels like biofuels and other oils. So really important that we look after our insects. And lastly, you can see how whole food chains and webs are dependent on insects. So insects are food for lots of different animals like swallows here, hedgehogs and bats, and they in turn are food for other animals. So badgers might eat a hedgehog, other birds might eat swallows like a sparrowhawk. So a whole ecosystem is dependent on us having plentiful supply of insects to feed all these other animals. So as you can see, they're really important to us, insects, and they need your help. And the good news is there's lots of things you can do to help them, by providing homes or habitats and food and water in your school grounds or even in your gardens or windowsill. So the first thing to do is to have a look at your garden or your school grounds and think about what spaces do we have for insects at school already? How can we make them better for insects? And how can we create new insect-friendly habitats or homes? Those are the three things we're going to look at quickly next. So the step one, the first thing to do is to find out how insect friendly your school grounds are already, because I expect there are some good habitats in there already. And I know a lot of schools in Leicester have already had help from our Grow Wild team. You've had your school grounds developed for you and for wildlife, so you can use them for education, for forest school sessions, but also for food growing like Sam talked about. So you are going to already probably have some great features there. So to do that, to find out what you've got, one of the things you can do is go on a biodiversity trail. So that's walk around your school grounds, and it's a good idea to think about how did it look if you were an insect. So you can think about where can you go to eat. So that might be looking for flowers that have nectar to eat, or it might be trees that have leaves that munching caterpillars can eat. Other thing is, where can you hide? Where can you take shelter? Where can you hide from predators so you don't get caught? And lastly, how easy is it for you to fly or move around the space to get from one sort of habitat or home to another in the school grounds? And as you're doing this, you could walk around and take photos of the different features, the different habitat types or homes that you've got in the grounds, or you could mark them on a plan map. Another thing you could do, instead of going on your trail, is actually to survey your grounds first for insects. So you could go on a bug hunt and find out which parts of the school grounds have the most insects in, and then you'll know which are the bits that are best to keep and which bits maybe need developing to be improved for insects. And then the next step, once you've done a survey, you've audited your grounds, is to firstly give yourselves a pat on the back, celebrate what you already have, but then have a look at what you could improve. So here's a picture. I know your school grounds won't look like this. This is a lovely ideal garden situation, but there are lots of features here that are good for insects. So you might have some of these. You think that's great, we've got those, but some of them maybe could be improved. So for example, you could think, could we make our stone or log piles bigger and better? Could we have more wild areas or bigger patches of long grass? Is our pond a bit overgrown? Does it need clearing out? Are compost heaps underused? Are we not really putting anything in them? Do our fruit trees need pruning? Because all types of habitats need looking after. Okay, so even fruit trees, they can grow more fruit if they're looked after properly, which is what Sam was talking about, your lovely fruit growing on them, but they can do with a bit of care and maintenance. So it might be that just the areas you've already got could be looked after a bit better. So after we found out what we've got, given ourselves a pat on the back and improved what we've got, we can then look at what things we might not have and we could add. Okay, so here are some suggestions of habitats that would be really good for insects. So we've got ponds. Now you can have a larger one, or you can just have one that's in a trug. So this one at the bottom here is one that we made in our garden. It's just made out of trug lined with some pond liner. So you don't have to have a big bit of water to be good for wildlife. So lots of flying insects start their lives in water. And these flying insects are really important food for birds and bats and other larger animals. So having water is really good. Fruit and vegetable beds. Well, Sam's already talked a lot about that, which is brilliant. And of course, they provide food for insects as well as nectar. Then we have what Lee was talking about here. This is a compost heap, but also next to it is a wormery. So that's the wormery that maybe Lee could buy if he doesn't decide to make one himself. So lots of spaces for insects to live in. And we have a bee hotel here and a mini beast hotel. So we get bees that live in hives in groups, but also solitary bees that live on their own, and they like to live in little holes. So that's providing a home for bees. And in fact, lots of important pollination work is carried out by bees that live on their own, solitary bees. A lot of you have probably seen or made a mini beast hotel, but you could always make another. There's plenty of spaces in corners in your school grounds to put another one in. Here we've got some spring flowering bulbs. Sometimes when bees and butterflies emerge from hibernation, because they hibernate over the winter, they go to sleep, they come out early in spring. And if the weather's been a bit too warm because of climate change and the changes in our weather systems, then they might come out and find there's no food available. So it's really good to have flowers that are early on in the year. So having bulbs that flower early mean that there's plenty of nectar sources available for those insects that come out early in spring. We've got some hedges and trees. So that's providing cover, but also food for insects. And then lastly, even if you've only got a small space, you can really make the best use of it. So you could put a green roof, so turn a garden shed into a habitat. So putting a green roof, so planting it up with different plants. And then lastly, I've got a picture here because there's an activity that's suggested coming up. And one of the activities suggested was to make a brash pile, but I didn't know if you'd know what that is. So a brash pile is really just a big organised pile of branches and sticks, which is a great place for insects to hide out in. So lots of different features that you could encourage your school to have in your school grounds. But also there's a suggested activity for you to go with today's session, and that's here. So it's 8 easy mini beast habitats. So eco schools at home activity. And here are the 8 different suggestions. So these are easy things that you might be able to create at home or at your school grounds, which don't take too much time and don't need too many materials. So we've got make a log pile, experiment with brash. So that was that picture of those sticks that I showed you. Got lay out some carpet tiles. That will be for mini beasts to hide under. Create a leaf pile. Leave some nettles to grow. We might not like them, but they're brilliant for caterpillars, butterflies to lay their eggs on. There's create a rock or stone pile, or let a patch of your playing field grass grow long. So don't cut it really short right up to the edge. Leave a margin of long grass. And lastly, you could try and grow a wildflower or mini meadow. And that's something you probably wouldn't do at this time of year, but it's something you could plant in the spring, is some wildflowers. So lastly, here are some useful links for you. So I've been talking about taking action for insects today, and you can download a whole pack. Has lots of ideas for you to get involved in helping insects in your school grounds. So you can download that. We've got some how-to videos to watch on our Wildlife Watch YouTube channel. And there's lots of ways to help you create homes for wildlife at the Wildlife Trust's website as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Martha. There's some fantastic ideas in there. Really great thinking about some of those ideas you could do in the school grounds. And it's really interesting because we've got lots of plans that we're putting together at the moment to work with schools during next spring and summer around pollination. and encouraging wildlife, particularly insects. So that's really, really positive, and I'll certainly be looking at that guide later today. So we'll move on to our third and final speaker today, who is Mary Jackson from Learning Through Landscapes. And without further ado, I'll hand straight over to Mary. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Lee. Hi, yes, I'm Mary. I'm Head of Education and Communities at Learning Through Landscapes. And so who are Learning Through Landscapes? Well, we're the UK school grounds charity. So we're interested in anything that happens in your school grounds or to your school grounds. So whether that's your lessons outside, whether it's play outside, whether it's contact with nature, anything to do with school grounds, we're there to help and support schools do that. And some of you may know us because we ran the pollination project, and there were 12 schools in Leicester that took part in the pollination project. So if you were part of that, that was something that we ran. So we are also really keen that school grounds are right for the 21st century, and that means that school grounds should be ready for climate change and should help and respond to climate change. And there's a lot you can do, and I'll talk about a few of those things about how you can do that, and a specific project idea that you could have a go at. So, as I say, lots of different ways school grounds can be used to help with climate change. Now, some of those things are so that you learn about climate change. So where better to learn about climate change than outside, and at school, the best place outside, obviously, is your school grounds. So that could be looking at what are the impacts of climate change. Now, climate means, as you probably know, the kind of long-term changes in weather, and weather is that what happens from day to day. So when you're thinking about climate change, one of the things you can do in your school grounds is discover what those changes in weather are, what is happening, what's different now to maybe what happened 10, 20 years ago. We've spoken about biodiversity loss and food as well. So those are two other things that are the impacts of climate change. So food security is all about being sure that you can grow enough food to feed everyone. And that is becoming harder and harder in different parts of the world. So that's something that you can think about in your own area, thinking about how you can make sure you have the food you need here, and think about how that impacts other people in different parts of the world as well. But you can also make your school grounds ready for climate change, adapting to the things that are happening. And obviously, one of the things that's happening with climate change is we're getting hotter summers. So sometimes it can be really, really hot in school grounds, especially if you haven't got many trees or you've got lots of tarmac and not much else. It can be really hot. So one of the things you can do in your school grounds is think about where you might add more shade and shelter, so that if you want to have lessons outside, or if you want to sit and talk with your friends, or if you're sitting at the side of the field in the middle of a PE lesson waiting for your go, you've got somewhere to sit and be cooler. Another thing that Sam kind of spoke about, and I'm going to talk about more, is about how you manage your water better. So there are lots of changes. It might be that we're getting wetter winters, and so there might be more flooding, but it also might be that there are drier summers, and so drought might be a problem. So thinking about how we manage our water better is really important. And part of making your school grounds climate ready may be thinking about how do you change the surfacing of your grounds. If all your site is tarmac, then there's lots of reasons that's not really good for climate change. It makes the place hotter, it makes the water run off and you lose the water. So lots of things that you might think about. And then you can also help to reduce the climate change in the future in your school grounds. Now, each individual school grounds doing something won't make huge difference, but there are 30,000 school grounds in the country, and each of them on average is over 2 hectares in size. So if we all do something, and then around the world schools do something, together we can make a difference. So maybe we can have some more planting in school grounds, and maybe you can think about renewable power systems in school grounds too. So what I'm going to specifically talk about is a project that we've been working on called Bioprofiles. Now, this is a project that is funded through Europe through a project called the Erasmus Plus programme, which is all about getting people in Europe to share ideas and experiences in education and learn from each other across Europe. And so we've had 4 countries involved in this project: Slovakia, Italy, Spain, and of course the UK. And it's all about environmental education that is taking learning outside. And we've looked at lots of different topics. So we've looked at water saving, we've looked at waste and recycling, we've looked at things that you might not have thought about, things like emotional mapping, and that's all about how you feel in a space. So when you go outside and you're maybe in the centre of the city, is that a place you feel safe in? Or is it a place that actually it makes you feel a little bit worried? So that's one of the things we've been looking at as well. So lots of different things. But what I'm going to talk about specifically is a project that we've done, that a few schools have done, looking at water retention. So what do we mean by water retention? Now, Sam has talked about this a little bit already, so that's really useful. So you've got it in your minds already. So water retention is about the natural ability of the land to retain water. So if we look at the little photo there in the right hand corner of your screen, you will see there's different surfaces. So at the bottom there's really tarmac, then we've got a little stone wall, then we've got a bit of bare soil, a bit of grass and a bit of bushes and maybe some trees. And each of those surfaces will retain water in different ways. So if you think about tarmac, when it rains, all that happens is the rain maybe falls into puddles or it washes away, but it doesn't soak down into the ground. That surface is impermeable. But what we really want are surfaces where the water can slowly absorb and stay in the ground. So those permeable surfaces are those that let the water soak in. So the ground, the soil is good at that. Having the vegetation, as Sam said before, it slows the water down, so it makes it easier to soak into the soil. If it all comes at once, it just rushes away, and even on the soil, you don't save all that water that you'd like to. It doesn't all soak in. So that vegetation is really useful. So why does that matter? Well, as I said before, as the climate changes, we're likely to have more extreme weather. That means more floods maybe in the winter, more droughts in the summer. And as we build more on the land and we have fewer and fewer areas that are natural spaces, that means we have more problems with the water just rushing away and not soaking into the soil. So instead, we're getting more flooding, and it also means the water's not there, so we're more susceptible to droughts. That means that when the droughts come, the water isn't there anymore. And that all means that soil can get eroded and plants don't need the water they need to survive. So it can be a real problem. So how can you find out a little bit more about it? Well, you can look at it in lots of different topics. You can look at it under climate change, you can look at the soil, you can look at the water cycle, lots of different ways you can look at it maybe in lessons. And you can do some practical experiments as well. This is just a fun one where you've got some water bottles with some soil and some bits of grass in them. And what you do is you put in the same amount of water at one end and see what floats out the other. Now, what is interesting there, you may look at that middle one and go, but more water's coming out of that middle one. Well, maybe it was really wet soil and it just had no more capacity to take up any more water. So it just had to flow out the other end. That's something that you'd work out in the design of your experiment. But you can actually do those kind of experiments in your school grounds as well. So you can work out how well your grounds retain water at the moment. So take some water out, water your grass, water your asphalt, your tarmac, and see what happens to the water. Does it soak in or does it just run off? And this is a school that was part of the project, the Bioprofiles project, school in Nottingham. And they did experiments around their school grounds on the different surfaces to see how quickly the water was absorbed in the soil or in the ground and how long it stayed on the surface. So you can see the concrete stayed for a long time, 4 minutes. It may have stayed even longer. It might have been a sunny day, and so it might have evaporated more quickly. But different areas took different lengths of time for the water to soak in. So you can see there the muddy flower bed, it was muddy. There was already, it looks like, so much water in the soil that it just couldn't absorb any more. But when you've done that, what you can then do is you've got an idea, you can do samples around your grounds, but how can you calculate that for your whole site? Well, what you can do is you can take a plan of your site, divide it up into different areas, work out how much is grass, how much might be trees, how much is tarmac, different surfaces, and then translate what you have learnt from your experiment to see how much water might be absorbed in your school grounds. And all the information on how to do this is in resources, and I'll point you to that at the end. So you know that your school grounds might be good, or it might be not very good at absorbing water. So how can you make that better? How do you make a difference? Well, first of all, you need to find out where that water goes. So is it going into the soil? Is it just going straight into the drains and washing away? And then you want to think about where can we make changes? As Sam said, if you can catch that water before it reaches the soil, or you slow it down in the trees and vegetation, that is a really good way of making sure that that water stays. So here we've got an example of a school who've planted some trees, planted some bushes in their school grounds, and that will all help to keep that water and retain that water in the soil. The trees and the bushes as well will also create shade, and that will mean the sun won't get down to the water and it won't make it evaporate too fast. So that is also another reason for planting trees and shrubs. And as Sam said, you can also put mulch down, which is a really good way of doing that as well. You want to check that your drains are clear so that if the water does flow out, it does nice and easily. But also think about changing the surfacing. You'll see on this picture, there's two different types of surfacing. On the right hand side, bottom right corner, there's kind of it's just the ground, it's just earth, but it gets quite compacted because children are running all over it all the time. But that will help the water soak through. But on the other side, you might not be able to see very clearly, but that is an area of hard surfacing. So it's lots of bricks, but all the bricks have holes in them so that the water can drain through the holes and drain into the ground. And the other thing you can do is what is called a SUDS, creating a sustainable drainage system. Now, this is quite a complex thing that you'd need to get an engineer in or something like that, and it'll be more expensive, but it is something that you can do, and some new schools have this designed into their school grounds. So it's a technical thing to think about. So if you're in maybe a secondary school and you want to think about engineering or landscape architecture and you find that interesting, this is something maybe you could investigate. So that was just one of these, what we call indicators, that were part of the project. So I think they're really topics. And here are some of the other ones that you could do. So if you think you'd like to do something in your school grounds to do with climate change, environmental education outside, lots of ideas, lots of resources. And the website that you can get them from is here, teachinggreen.eu/enviro. I can't even pronounce that. I'll leave it there. But that is it. So I will leave that there with you. And that's me. So I'll stop sharing my screen now, Lee, and over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mary. Some really interesting resources there. And I have to say, I saw some of these a couple of weeks ago and was thinking these would be fantastic for our schools because of most of our schools do eco schools in the city. And quite often when they do an outdoor project, they struggle to do the monitoring bit. So there's lots of ideas there that schools might want to pick just one or two of those indicators to look at that. So it could be to do with like fly tipping, for example. That's one that we've sort of just mentioned, quite topical from the video at the beginning, or it might be the water.
And there's lots of links to apps and things like that as well, lots of other resources. So and what's really nice is you can see what other schools have done around Europe as well. So you can see how schools have used those resources and tried them out. They've all been tried and tested by schools. So hopefully that will show you how other schools have done them.
Fantastic, that's brilliant. Thank you very much for that. So that's our three speakers today. So we're going to wrap up very shortly, but just to give you a quick heads up of what's happening tomorrow. So tomorrow is our waste day. So we've got Lisa back from Food for Life, who's going to be talking about particularly food waste. We've got Kim Tilley from the City Council, who's going to be talking around our metal campaign and something called a scrunch test. So finding out which sort of plastics we can recycle and which ones we can't yet. And also we're going to be playing some of our poets that are linked to our competition that we've got at the moment. Lots of activities tomorrow around looking at waste. And then tomorrow evening for teachers, we've got our food waste webinar, again with Lisa and with a member of staff from Avenue Primary. So look forward to seeing all that tomorrow. And then just to wrap up today, we've got our 3 quiz questions. So for people that have been participating this last few days, these are our next questions. So question 1, what do we call outdoor learning which could include learning in a woodland? So is that woodland walks? Is it forest schools, or is it those? Question 2, school grounds are home to all sorts of mini beasts, exactly what Martha's been talking about. So if you lift up a rock or a log and you find a crustacean with 14 legs, what is it? Is it a centipede? Is it a woodlouse? Or is it a caterpillar? You might do a bit of research if you're not sure. And question 3. So trees are home to all sorts of wildlife. So in our school ground, you may be lucky enough to have a tree with acorns that supports more life than any other native tree species in the UK. What is it? Is it an oak? Is it a silver birch? Or is it a rowan? So that's our 3 questions for today. So that wraps up our school grounds day today. Massive thank you to our 3 speakers. Hopefully lots of ideas in there to get you thinking around how we can tackle climate change in school grounds, because exactly what we've said, even with a very small space, there's lots of opportunities that we could create and monitor within there. So we'd love to hear about what you're getting up to during Climate Action Fortnight, or even afterwards if you're watching these after the fortnight. Get in touch through any of our social media channels, through our website, and if you want any contacts from anyone today or any more information, just drop us an email and that address is there. And obviously share on social media with the hashtag ClimateActionLE. So thank you very much everyone, have a great day and we'll look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Thanks, bye bye.